Terrific, thank you. Good morning, everyone. How are you going? Good, fantastic. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Aaron. I'm the assistant principal at Glen Eira College. If you've not heard of that school before, it's a government 7 to 12 college located about 5 or 10 kilometres from here. We've got about 850 students. We're back onto Caulfield Racecourse, and absolutely delightful place to work. When I started there about 5 years ago, Shireen, our principal, who is here with us today, threw the portfolio of student voice, agency and leadership. And I spent the first couple of years on that, really just sort of doing some of the low-hanging fruit, tightening up some of the work around our student leadership portfolios in particular. And then I suppose a couple of years into that work and into the role and being at the school, I then started to look and think about, well, how can we use voice and agency, particularly within the classroom, and how can we use voice and agency within the classroom to improve student learning outcomes? And I suppose with that in mind, that's how I came to be in this fellowship in particular, with a particular interest area on this and building the capacity of my staff to be able to support young people in their classrooms. And so I went away and, as Kate was just alluding to, using some of the support of the Menzies Fellowship and the time that allowed me, started to look into the resourcing, started to look into the information that was available, the publications. What I was hoping to find was I could go and find some ready-to-use little handbook that I could pick up, go take back to my school and then use that to develop that with my staff and to help to build their confidence implementing that. Instead, what I found were three challenges, I suppose, before I really even got started. So the first one, we found that constructs that were inadequately defined. So I wanted to go back to my staff and say, hey, look, here's this great idea, but some of the language was really tricky. And I'll just give you one basic example of that. In the Gonski report, one of the recommendations was that all students have the opportunity within schools to be partners. And at no time was the word partners unpacked to explain what that could possibly mean in terms of a relationship between teachers and students and who took responsibility and who had autonomy and those sorts of things. So we had lots of words like that were being used, but no clarity over what they actually meant. The second barrier that we found was that advice that was too vague to be meaningful or actionable. And so that obviously meant when I was trying to build teacher confidence and say, come along with me, let's go, they looked at the advice and it wasn't necessarily crystal clear. A little example of that from the practice principles for teaching and learning. This is from the Victorian framework for teaching and learning. They'd use words like democratic voice, again without unpacking what that might actually look like in a classroom. Co-designing a curriculum without explaining what we do with the thousands of pages of documentation that already exist, and how we have to integrate student perspectives into that. And language like co-designing, and again, not really thoroughly unpacked in a way that gave teachers confidence to be able to go away and do things. And then the third barrier was around causal claims that were unwarranted, and there are a number of those within the Amplified document, which was produced by the Department of Education about 6 years ago. And lots of quality stuff in there, but didn't necessarily give us the tools that we needed to be able to sort of unpack some of those things. So here I was hoping to pick up a package, lead my staff, and away we go. And in the end, we sort of ended up feeling a little bit more like that. It didn't really feel like we had the tools, and so I suppose that's a bit of a long-winded introduction to say we then had to think really carefully about how we introduced and implemented student voice, agency and leadership, and really equipping our staff so that they felt confident not only in their own capacity, but in the capacity of their peers in the rooms and classrooms beside them. And so I suppose there's three lessons that I've picked up on, and I suppose I really just want to share those now, and hopefully give you a couple of examples of each. So the first main lesson was that language matters. As I mentioned before, there was a lot of language that was never properly unpacked. What we wanted to do was make it really easy for teachers to understand what we meant when we were using key terms and key definitions. And so that's one of the places that we started, because many of our staff looked at some information that had previously, and it was basically it was a word salad, frankly. And so we went from having really vague and non-specific information to getting it down to just one simple set of definitions, and our sort of criteria for success is we could get it onto one page. We felt that gave teachers a really easy opportunity to take that with them, digest it quickly and easily, and then remember it to use it in the classroom. So plain language, easy to remember. And we also made sure that in that we provided some non-examples. So when we were talking about what does student voice look like, we also talked about what it doesn't look like. We sort of unpacked that so that was really clear and easy for people to be able to understand. And so that when they saw non-examples in their classrooms or non-examples in coordinators having conversations, they were able to quickly identify that actually that is not an example of student voice, that's an example of student noise. And that was some language that they picked up, being able to try and differentiate between the two. Similarly, just around language, we just tried to make it clear. And so before I showed you these practice principles, and so the grey box on the left is what's in the practice principles, the red box on the right is what's in our policy. And so when the practice principles talked about having a democratic voice, our policy actually says schools are rarely able to operate as democracies. Where they can, let's talk about that, but we wanted to set really clear, practical and realistic hopes and dreams for our teachers when they started out on this journey. And then again, another example, action 3.2 from the practice principles was about teachers co-designing, whereas we made it really clear that actually teachers have and continue to hold the legal and professional responsibility to make sure their classrooms are safe and that they actually have to uphold the academic standards within that. So we sort of tried to provide some really clear boundaries in which voice and agency are able to operate. So that was the first lesson. The first lesson was then to create, the second lesson was then to create a bit of a map of what that might look like. And Lynn Kazali came and ran a symposium for our student leaders at the end of last year, setting some goals for this year. And one of the lessons that she taught them was that having a map is really important, but the accuracy and the appropriateness of the map is less important than actually just having a map. And so we didn't necessarily start this journey with a fully formed map, but we at least wanted to have some clear steps. And one of the things we wanted to map out, and Aidan's work in supporting us was instrumental in this in terms of developing a bit of an idea, a mental model, and actually we've got that then down on paper, of what are the things that need to happen and in which order. And one of the things that we discovered was there's actually some really important prerequisites. So before you even try and implement student voice and agency within the classroom, there's some things you have to need to do before that. And so I'll just use that as one example of sort of a map that we use to pull that into place. So we tried to make it really clear that before you try and give students a voice, it needs to be a calm and orderly learning environment. And the main message we've given to our teachers is that no child will feel that their ideas matter if their classroom is chaotic. And so we just tried to make that really clear that before you worry about making sure there's a democratic voice, make sure that students can literally, in the most literal sense, just be heard and that they know that their voice matters. So that was the first step. Second one was then around just the belief that students have the ability to improve their lives. Now, I have 4 children, 3 of whom are in high school. I know they don't always make decisions that improve their lives. I know that better than anyone else. But we have to have at least the belief that they can do that. The third one was coherent, guaranteed and viable curriculum. And this one was a bit of a tricky one because you read some of the language earlier, it's about co-designing curriculum. And so people would come to us and go, but isn't the point around student agency teaching students to think for themselves? And yes, it is. But we wanted to distinguish between thinking and actually thinking well. And so to be able to think well, they need to be exposed to a range of arguments, and they need to be exposed to some schools of thought that actually clearly articulate the best and the worst sometimes of the things that have been thought previously. So we tried to make sure that in our map it was really clearly articulated to our staff that this was an important precondition. Having that mapped out for them gave them a lot of security, and it made them feel really confident that they knew what we were doing and that we had thought it out in advance so that they didn't get to that situation where they were suddenly panicking because they didn't know how to reconcile the existing curriculum with providing students with the opportunity to be able to have agency. And then the fourth one was teachers as curriculum experts, beg your pardon. And again, that's built on this belief that helping students make informed and reasoned decisions requires significant scaffolding. Our young people are novices and they need significant support from our adults around them. And so we wanted to make sure that was really clearly articulated rather than just using words like democracy. We actually wanted to remind our staff that they have skills and abilities that they've been trained and trusted with for many, many years, and that those things are still important. And so once we sort of had all those things mapped out, that gave them a lot of confidence that they knew what they were doing and they could move forward in some of the implementation in other areas. Which brings us to the third one, which is around actionable steps. Early before our introduction, Kerry was talking about collective efficacy being built with modelling and by teachers experiencing success. So to go with our sort of one-page definitions, we then came up with some one-page, and this is just some samples that we used from one of our professional learning communities last year. And that second one from the top, the coloured grid, I actually used that with my Year 12s yesterday or the day before. Really great strategy. But we gave teachers these one-page strategies that they can then take with them, pick up. If they did nothing else but that one strategy, gave them something easy to implement. And what it meant is that they had really early experience of success. They picked it up, great, I've tried that, it worked, it was straightforward, and I could just run with it straight away. And so it's been a bit of a model that we've used, trying to get it down to these just one-page summaries so that teachers have something actionable, clear steps, clear operations that they can then go and use in their classroom. And we've then modelled these in staff meetings and those sorts of things. So they've seen them being used by their peers, and their peers are being able to say, hey, here's one I tried, why don't you give this one a go? So a couple of these I've tried, a couple of them have come to me from colleagues, and they've been really interesting to be able to have. And so with that in mind, at the start of this journey, we asked our teachers how they felt about the place of student voice and agency and leadership within the classroom, so specifically with that last focus in mind. And initially, on this sort of continua, we had in the top right-hand corner high levels of understanding and high levels of comfort, and the bottom left-hand corner, that should say low levels of understanding, low levels of understanding, low levels of comfort. And you can see we've got a stack in the bottom left-hand corner, some in the middle, some in the top right-hand corner. And at the end of the project, we asked them the same question, and you can see this all migrated up towards the top right-hand corner there. So I consider that a little mark of success. It's not perfect and we're not there yet, but really exciting project to undertake. My time is well and truly up. Thank you so much, everyone.